Last year, I was contacted by a man in rural Pennsylvania who I'll call Brian. Brian couldn't afford the cure for his disease. Brian has hepatitis C, a life-threatening viral disease that now has a cure. The cure is very similar to a medicine that's been used to treat HIV for quite a while now, and it costs less than $100 to make. But Brian's cure is priced in the tens of thousands of dollars. The clock is ticking for Brian while he waits for pharmaceutical corporations to lower their price barriers. It's already too late for 26-year-old Alex Smith Holt, who died earlier this year in Indiana because he couldn't afford the insulin he needed as a type 1 diabetic. The basic research and clinical trials for medicines for both of these diseases were paid for and subsidized by the taxpayer dollars of regular people, not wealthy private investment. Between 2010 and 2016, 210 medicines were approved by the FDA, and every single one originated in university and government labs, paid for and subsidized by taxpayer dollars. In 2018, we have the capacity to bring the death toll from hepatitis C and type 1 diabetes to absolutely zero. We haven't done it because we've allowed a few rich people to tell us that they'd rather make more money than allow people to live. How can you not be angry that a solution for a disease sitting on the table, so cheap to make, is put out of reach? Or a cure that could exist but doesn't because investors decided you couldn't pay them enough money to interest them. Vaccines, diagnostics, medicines often originate with government grants to universities, just like CASE, only to be pumped out at the final stage as an investment tool for speculation. Except we're not talking about oil or pork bellies. We're talking about your life. We often think of anger as a negative emotion, but anger is the emotion of injustice. Poet and philosopher David Whyte says, anger is the deepest form of compassion for another, for the self, for a life, for the body, for a family, for the world, and for all our ideals. Anger, rooted in deep love, provides the energy required to make things right. I am a Latina American physician, scientist in training, and a health justice activist. I've been working since my teens to fight for access to medicines for all, shining a light on the injustices of our current biomedical research and development system. I've seen the commodification of health and life, and I've seen universities complicit in putting profit over people, violating their stated missions for social good. But I've also seen how publicly funded research results are beginning to crack open to the masses under pressure from scientist activists. And I've seen how we can hold governments and universities accountable with our anger to force them to make access to medicines for all a reality. So let me tell you the untold story of why drug prices are so high and how informed and angry people can make access to medicines for all a reality by looking at the root causes of the problems. And let me show you what it will take to win. By now, most of us realize that there's something wrong with the way that we make medicines. Healthcare was the #1 issue this election season, and drug prices are the most rapidly rising costs in healthcare. This situation has elevated to the level of crisis. Around 45 million people, or about 18% of the US population, did not fill a prescription drug because of a high drug price in 2016. And even though drug prices have tripled in the last decade, analysts predict that they will again double within the next 10 years. This problem is not going away. Recently, I got a recruitment email from a life sciences investment firm. The pitch was, come work for us. Tell us which technologies we should invest in so that we can make lots of money. Apart from laughing to myself and thinking, whoa, you have definitely sent this to the wrong person, I kind of laughed and thought, well, wow, this is a reminder of the way that the patent system currently works. It grants legal monopolies to exploit new technologies, and this allows companies to charge whatever they want for medicines. This transforms life-saving medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics into tools for speculation, priced as if these were optional purchases for sick people. Companies use the basically the motive to say that they need to create artificial scarcity using patent monopolies to make their product more valuable for investors. But when companies make this argument about medicines, value already exists. We call it people's lives. The general public is led to believe that a drug price corresponds directly to the necessary costs of research and development. But in reality, a drug price just reflects the maximum amount of money that a monopolist can extract on behalf of their investors. Universities often play into this by doing taxpayer-funded research and then patenting their discovery, only to sell it to the highest bidder, who goes on to sell a vaccine, diagnostic, or other medicine for the highest possible price for as long as they possibly can. The history of biomedical research and development took place in the halls of altruists, universities, and governments. The way things are now, with a commodification of life-saving medicines, is not how it's always been, and it's not how it always has to be. A group of student activists that I've worked with from the beginning understands this. Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, or UAEM, is a global group of student activists who organize to ensure that medicines that are publicly funded are affordable and accessible to the public. We champion alternatives to patents, and we fight to make medicines for people, not for profit. We've learned that when we directly work with people who perpetuate the high costs of drugs, these things don't change that much. But when we battle bad systems, whenever we confront governments and universities on their patent practices, this is when we see change. We're a pretty nerdy bunch, but we're also angry that governments and universities have failed us in this regard. And that anger powers us on to fight for a new biomedical research and development system. Oops. As a scientist, I study stomach bacteria. The gut has an ecosystem of life in it called a microbiome. The gastric microbiome consists of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that help us digest our food and regulate our immune system. It's a pretty complex set of diseases, and it's a pretty complex microbiome, and one thing we've learned is that healthy people have highly diverse microbiomes. Sick people have fewer microbe species in their gut. So one thing we've learned is that this is a complex system that thrives on diversity. And based on what we've seen in the past few decades, this points the way towards the future of biomedical research and development as well. Given the lack of current true competition in the US prescription drug market, our current biomedical research and innovation microbiome is dysbiotic, unbalanced, inhospitable to low drug prices, and maladapted to serving all human need. The culprit is an overgrowth of a particular species called the patent monopoly. The solution is to create a new environment, to give our patent monopoly microbe some friends. Let me introduce you to a few of them. Prizes are an alternative form to patents that incentivize research in a particular area. Governments or other funders provide a large pot of prize money to whoever reaches a biomedical discovery milestone first. This covers the cost of research and development plus the profit margin. So there's no need to charge high prices to recoup costs. The results are put in the public domain, available for all. Licensing is also a powerful tool for governments and universities, who can work into their license agreements clauses that ensure the final product of their patent is actually affordable and accessible. Governments can also ensure that, there's less monopolies by licensing their patents to multiple entities. Some universities are starting to do this by incorporating UAEM's global access licensing framework into their licensing practices. And generic competition. It helps drive drug prices down close to the cost to manufacture them. This phrase of generic competition is key. You need one generic or off-patent medicines being made by two or more manufacturers who are actually competing against each other to offer the lowest price possible by making the most medicines. When HIV appeared on the scene, it was low-cost access to generic competition that revolutionized access to life-saving medicines. Not donations, not governments overpaying. Governments must award patents less often and only for true novelty and utility. Governments must also decrease the length of a patent monopoly so that the market can help control some of these high drug prices. And there are more species, or models, if you will. In fact, UAM, the group that I mentioned earlier, they compiled 81 alternatives to patent monopolies and high drug prices. Let's incorporate these models into our innovation microbiome. Awarding patents in some cases may still make sense, but as a guiding principle, all of these models must ensure that research that's done with public dollars is actually resulting in products that are affordable and accessible for the public. Incorporating these new models will ensure a people-centered future where both biomedical innovation and access to medicines for all is possible. Refusing to implement alternatives to patents is asking for our healthcare system to be further bankrupted by a profit-driven cycle, and for people to continue to have to choose between medicines or food and heat, and for people like Alex to lose their lives. This is unacceptable. I want to challenge the voice telling you that we can't do anything about this. We've revolutionized access to basic needs like medicine, like water, natural gas, and electricity in the past century. Let's do that for essential medicines. It doesn't take 100 years to do this. It takes political courage. As a physician scientist, my colleagues and I are told to dedicate our lives to translating the research that we do in the lab to the patient's bedside. But to which patient's bedside? We all will be vulnerable to becoming sick and then to the high costs of medicines. So it's very important for us to think about how we think about our future biomedical innovation system. First, to begin to move forward, universities must commit to making sure that patents that are developed with public funding go on to create products that are actually affordable and accessible to the public. They can do this through licensing agreements and by licensing to multiple entities. Universities must demand that governments and funders commit dollars and leadership to patent alternative models. Second, universities and governments must respond to that call. Governments must ensure that they are dedicating dollars and leadership towards supporting patent alternative models. Governments must also ensure that they are demanding transparency around drug development so that we can continue to improve our innovation policy. But none of this is possible without you. All of the background papers in the world won't make a difference unless you are out there making active steps to change the structures in place and the people who run these institutions. So basically talk to your politicians and really enforce this issue. Universities and governments should be held accountable on this issue. Channel your voice and channel into a vision to support access to medicines for all. Talk to your friends, family, coworkers about high drug prices, but do so in an empowered way that faces the fact that we can fix this. Emphasize that this situation is not normal and that we have a right to be angry and a right to demand change. Especially talk to university and government leaders who are strategically placed to make these changes. Only vote for people who will make systematic changes and provide systematic solutions to high drug prices, and hold them accountable. To the students, the scientists, and the healthcare workers out there, you have status that few others have. Universities and the biomedical industry need you, and people outside the healthcare workforce, they listen to you too. Leverage your voice. Uplift those in your local community who are most impacted by this issue. Access to medicines is an LGBTQ, immigrant, women, people of color issue. We are interconnected with many social justice movements. Remember, if you want to be heard, tell a story. Tell your story. Tell an untold story. Movements are built on untold stories. I've told the untold story of how informed and angry people can make access to medicines for all a reality by looking at the problems, the solutions, and how to channel our anger from here. We've been told to suppress our rage and grief at the current pharmaceutical research and development system because this is the way things have to be. But experiencing grief has taught me that anger is a part of this process. Grief is an important part of this process. And grief means that you've loved something. And anger protects that love and drives us to be better. Anger provides the energy required to make things right. No one should be sick because they're poor or poor because they are sick. We are angry, and that makes us fearless. And we are rooted in radical love for others. That makes us win. Thank you.